Hello, this is cjhoyle, and welcome to the second episode of my Eastern Ontario bike tour series. Today is day number 2 of my 9-day trip, and I'll be riding from Burritts Rapids to the Mille Roches Campground just outside of Cornwall. To begin the day, I'll follow the Rideau River until I reach Kentville, where I'll head south and begin riding through open farmland. Eventually, I'll join the waterfront trail, which will lead to the Long Sault Parkway, where my campground is located. From there, I'll make an evening trip to the city of Cornwall, where I'll stop for dinner before heading back to my campsite. So today is Sunday, September 1st, 2019, and I woke up in my tent in Burritts Rapids at around 7:30 a.m. Last night the temperature dropped down to 7 degrees Celsius, but it's already warmed up to 12 degrees. There's absolutely no wind this morning, and everything looks so beautifully calm and peaceful. Last night was my first time camping at a log station, and it was a positive experience that I definitely would recommend. Also camping here last night was a group of canoeists, who this morning will be beginning a very long 40-kilometer paddle further downstream to the Long Island log station. While I soaked in the beauty of the morning, I enjoyed an energizing serving of my campsite overnight oats. By 8:30 I had all my gear loaded onto my bike, and I was ready to begin my ride. So my destination for tonight is virtually due east of my starting point, but I'll be switching back and forth between a lot of quiet roads to get there. Often when you're riding east, you can count on the prevailing wind from the west to help push you along. But this morning there's still absolutely no wind, so I've got my work cut out for myself, though I'm certainly not complaining because this weather is absolutely beautiful. With the blue sky and a nice bright sun, the temperature's already warmed up to 20 degrees Celsius. As I'm approaching the community of Kentville, the road is relatively busy, but a portion of it has this multi-use trail running next to it. Through Kentville I rode on some neighborhood streets, and here I'm crossing over the Kentville Creek. The next obstacle I'm crossing over here is Highway 416, which connects the city of Ottawa with Highway 401. I've now found my way onto a very quiet road, with the only downfall being that there were several unleashed dogs that wanted to come and chase me and my bike. So I'm now riding within the township of North Dundas, which is part of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry. This small community I'm riding through is called Mountain. Until I get down to the St. Lawrence River this afternoon, I won't be passing through any major communities. Most of these roads I'm riding on are just so quiet and peaceful, and they have virtually no traffic on them today. As I was riding, I spotted some wind turbines in the distance. These are Siemens SWT turbines, which are part of the 30 megawatt South Branch wind farm built in 2014. As I'm riding, I've been listening to CBC radio. This morning they've been discussing the emerging dilemma of what surname should you give a child in a family where both parents have chosen to keep their own surnames. The time is now around 11:30, and I've traveled 48 kilometers so far this morning. Another topic that I've heard discussed quite a bit on the radio this morning is back to school, as tomorrow is the unofficial last day of summer for most school children. Here I'm crossing over the South Nation River, which from here flows northeast and eventually empties into the Ottawa River. I'll be crossing over this river again on day 4 of my trip. Earlier this morning I mentioned a road which had a lot of unleashed dogs running on it. Well, this road here has unleashed cats on it, and thankfully, unlike the dogs, they had no interest in chasing me and my bike. This small community I'm riding through is called Dunbar, and I've now left the township of North Dundas and entered the municipality of South Dundas. Over the last few years, while doing bike tours through farmland, I've become quite interested in agriculture. While I'm riding, I enjoy examining the fields I'm passing and trying to identify the different crops. Most of the fields I've been seeing so far on this trip have been either soybeans or corn, but I believe the crop growing in this field is buckwheat. Buckwheat is a short-season crop, and it's seeded in the mid-summer, which explains why it's flowering so late in the season. As I was riding, I decided to snack on an apple, since the time is nearly 1 p.m., and I've been getting hungry with no restaurants along this route. Here I'm now crossing over Highway 401. Throughout eastern Ontario, the 401 follows a similar path as the St. Lawrence River, so I'll soon be joining the waterfront trail. This portion of the St. Lawrence River has some really interesting history. For centuries, the St. Lawrence River has been an important transportation corridor for watercraft accessing the Great Lakes, but there are several sections of the river which have rapids. Various canals and locks have existed on the river going back as far as 1779, but the system received its biggest upgrade in the 1950s when the St. Lawrence Seaway was built. This project included the construction of the Moises-Saunders Power Dam, which substantially raised the water level in the river upstream and permanently flooded a large portion of the shoreline. The path I'm riding on right now sits on the former bed of the CN rail line, which had to be rerouted further north in preparation for the anticipated flooding. Just like this morning, there's virtually no wind, and the water looks so still and it's incredibly beautiful. In addition to the railway having to be moved away from the river to accommodate the dam, there were also 6,500 people who were displaced, and the community of Ingleside, where I'm riding now, is one of the places they were relocated to in the 1950s before the flooding began. The time is now 1:45 and I'm feeling very hungry for lunch, so I stopped in Ingleside at a restaurant called Jimmy's. I was craving something sweet, so I ordered their chocolate chip pancakes, and they were very tasty as expected. After my meal, I rejoined the waterfront trail, which led me to the entrance to the Long Sault Parkway. The Long Sault Parkway consists of a chain of small islands, which are connected together by a series of causeways. Once again, I'm absolutely loving this beautiful waterfront scenery on this extremely perfect, calm summer day. The Long Sault Parkway has a paved shoulder, and there are lots of other cyclists out enjoying riding this afternoon. Prior to the planned flooding of the river in the 1950s, the islands which form the parkway were the high points of land along the former shoreline. The Long Sault Parkway was created specifically as a place for recreation, and there are 3 campgrounds along it, including the Mille Roches Campground, which is where I've now arrived to camp for tonight. After I arrived, I visited the park office, where I purchased a camping permit for tonight. Before proceeding to my campsite, I decided to go and check out the beach. With such perfect weather on the last long weekend of the summer, the beach was quite busy. As I walked around, I noticed a lot of people who were speaking French. This beach is situated only about 30 kilometers from the Quebec border, but there are also many francophone people who live in eastern Ontario. After a long day of bike riding, there's nothing quite like a refreshing swim to celebrate the accomplishment. The beach was very sandy, and the water was quite warm. A unique feature of this beach is that the Long Sault Dam is very prominently in view across on the American side of the river. This dam was built in the 1950s, and it serves as the spillway for the Moises-Saunders Power Dam that I mentioned earlier. After my swim, I made my way towards my campsite, which is over on an adjacent island called Snetsinger Island. The Mille Roches Campground is managed by the St. Lawrence Parks Commission, which is an Ontario government agency. So essentially it's a campground which is operated by the Ontario provincial government, but it's not a provincial park. After arriving at my campsite, my first order of business is to repair this damaged seam on my tent, which I discovered yesterday. Thankfully, I carry a small sewing kit with me when I'm touring for doing exactly these types of repairs. After restitching it, you can hardly notice it was repaired, but most importantly, the seam is nice and strong again. So I set up my newly repaired tent, and then got back on my bike to start heading towards the city of Cornwall, where I'll be visiting and having my dinner tonight. The time is already about 6:20 p.m., but similar to yesterday, I haven't been feeling very hungry yet, since I had a fairly late lunch today. After riding all the way to the east end of the Long Sault Parkway, I joined the waterfront trail, which has a nice multi-use trail running along beside the highway. Here I'm riding past the Lost Villages Museum, which is a collection of historic buildings, many of which were relocated here from the 10 communities along the St. Lawrence River that were lost when the dam was built. I'm now entering the city limits of Cornwall, which was first settled in 1784 and has a current population of about 46,000. These power lines overhead lead to the Saunders generating station, which produces hydroelectricity from the Moises-Saunders Power Dam. The dam stretches a total length of nearly 1 kilometer, and its completion 61 years ago is what's responsible for the permanent flooding of the St. Lawrence River upstream from here, which reshaped the shoreline so significantly, as I've discussed earlier today. The international border runs down the middle of the river, so approximately half of the dam sits on American soil and feeds power to the St. Lawrence Franklin D. Roosevelt Power Project. The American and Canadian portions of the dam have a combined nameplate capacity of nearly 2,000 megawatts. Over on my left, I'm now riding along beside the Cornwall Canal. Prior to the completion of the St. Lawrence Seaway in 1958, the Cornwall Canal allowed small ships to avoid the Long Sault Rapids on the St. Lawrence River through a series of 6 locks. The blue sky from earlier today has been replaced with a lot of cloud coverage this evening, and I'm starting to feel a few raindrops starting to hit me. This bridge I'm riding under is the Seaway International Bridge, which connects the city of Cornwall to Cornwall Island and then continues on to New York State. When I arrived in downtown Cornwall, the rain had suddenly really picked up, so I had to choose a restaurant quickly. I ended up at a restaurant called Truffles Burger Bar, which had a lot of very unique burgers to choose from, including a $100 burger that served with 23 karat gold dust. I selected the much more economical Aloha burger. After my meal, I began my ride back to my campsite on the Long Sault Parkway. The rain had completely stopped before I left the restaurant, but it picked up again and started raining lightly as I was riding back. Despite being showered on for much of my ride, I stopped at the park restroom building when I got back to Mille Roches and took a shower before returning to my tent. The rain continued for the rest of the evening, but I bundled up inside my dry sleeping bag and fell asleep to the sound of raindrops on the outside of the tent. So including my ride back and forth to Cornwall this evening, I rode my bike a total of 142 kilometers today. Stay tuned for the next episode in my Eastern Ontario bike tour series, where tomorrow on day 3 I'll be riding northeast of Voyageur Provincial Park, situated on the Ottawa River. I hope you enjoyed joining me for day number 2 of my trip. If you watched all the way to the end of this video, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.